Now, child, let me tell you, getting diagnosed with ADHD can be a journey. And I know firsthand how confusing, overwhelming, and straight up exhausting it can be to figure out if you have it, especially if you're a woman and a woman of color. You hear me? Hi, I'm Shaniqua, and I was finally diagnosed at 41 years old. Now, this was almost 20 years of me trying to get diagnosed and being told that I was only anxious or depressed and being shoved medication for it. So I know for a fact that getting diagnosed could be a really hard journey, but it doesn't have to be that way. So even though the path to diagnosis isn't simple, in this video, I'm going to break down the 4 steps to get an official diagnosis for ADHD. Now, this is based on my own journey, my own experiences, and those I have helped get theirs as well. So by the end of this video, you're going to know what to ask for, how to advocate for yourself, how to deal with all the medical gatekeeping that can come with getting an ADHD diagnosis. Trust me, I've been there. So stick around until the end because there is going to be one step that I am pretty sure no one speaks about, but could make the difference between you getting the diagnosis that you feel is actually accurate for you. Step 1, do your research and know what to look for. Before you even step foot into the doctor's office, you need to do your research. And I don't mean just Googling for 5 minutes to find symptoms, because most of these symptoms were usually based off of a white male child who could not sit their tail down. In fact, ADHD, especially in women, looks pretty much different than what the stereotypical symptoms of ADHD look like. And I am my number one case study, because when I first suspected that what I had was ADHD, I didn't look like what ADHD was told to look like. I wasn't the boy bouncing off the walls. I wasn't the super fidgety type. No, because my hyperactivity tended to be more in my brain as opposed to in my body. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't in my body. I was still doing things such as stimming, biting my nails, but it was more in my brain, right? In fact, I had no idea that I could possibly have ADHD until I read an article in 2008 about Justin Timberlake not taking medicine because he didn't want to kill his creativity. Well, that's not actually what gave me the clue. The clue was there was an article right below by ADD Etude, so attitude, I guess, and it had an article about how ADHD in girls and women looked different than it did in boys. And so I clicked that article. And one of the first things I learned was that it could be hereditary. And here's why that matters. My 2 kids at the time were both already diagnosed with ADHD. But again, as I told you, it didn't look like theirs. And as I read the article, that's where I learned about hyperactivity of the brain. My gosh, what a moment of veil lifting from over my eyes. I was so happy to maybe have an answer as to why I was so different, as to why my brain was always racing, as to why I was always late to everything, and as to why my executive dysfunction got the best of me. In fact, I didn't even know that terminology at the time. I was constantly overwhelmed. I was always in trouble at work. And I often heard the phrase, "You're not living up to your potential." Well, guess what? It's hard to live up to your potential when you have this invisible barrier in front of you because you're trying to live up to what other people had in their head, their mind, their visioning of what your potential looks like. But when your brain is different, oh baby, your potential is astronomical, but not the way they want. Let me not get off on a tangent, y'all. That's the ADHD working. That is what I do. So, here are your action tips, right? The first thing for you to do is get educated. You got to start looking at what ADHD looks like in adults. And as I told you before, my journey was decades. I was diagnosed as depressed at 16, which, by the way, I think is a really early time to be diagnosing a hormonal teen with that and giving them these mind altering substances like Prozac. That did so much damage to me. But also, what ADHD looks like in women as well as people of color and women of color, especially, because the expression of it is going to be tempered by the expectations of society. We've overlooked this for so long, and a lot of the research, as I stated earlier, is usually based on a school age white male. While they get the benefit of having a neurological difference given as a reason for their inability to sit down or to pay attention or for their bad grades or just subpar grades, women, and especially women of color, were not given that luxury. So, one of the first places you can go into, and I know this is going to sound like a really bad suggestion, but it is the one that helped me advocate for myself. And that was going to stories, anecdotes of people who had been diagnosed late, especially the late diagnosed. Like, that's really important because as a child, that means that you were exhibiting more often or just more outwardly. But as a woman who may have done pretty well at school, may have been gifted as I was, high IQ as I was, and so overlooked as I was, hearing from people what that expression was for them in their lives, like what that ADHD looked like in their everyday life, that could be game changing because it was for me. Again, I told you it took me 20 years to get diagnosed, but it was finally watching a video of Danny Donovan on TikTok to start going, okay, this is what I'm going through. And before that, it was her cartoons that were circulating on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And I was relating to a lot of them. And I was like, what is this? And that's how I ended up on her TikTok. And I was like, oh my gosh, ADHD is this pervasive? I thought it was just focus. Because that's what the joke is. That's what the stereotype is. That is just focus. But y'all, there is just so many areas of the brain that ADHD affects, especially executive functioning. And that is where I had it the most. That is where I had an obstacle that felt like a Sisyphus mountain to climb. So I want you to go into these resources. One of them is going to be social media, which is absolutely fine. Don't let anybody anti-Noah you. And I'm saying it that way because Noah was building an ark, uh, a big old boat for rain that was not visible to other people. But that's actually what ADHD is. It is a difference of the brain that is not visible to other people. So don't you listen to those other people who are discouraging you. Go find your resources. So social media is a viable resource as long as you don't let that be your only resource. Because step 2 is to go to researched type of resources, such as the Attitude magazine. You can look up those reputable sources by specialists that studied ADHD. There's some doctors here on YouTube. Often clips are shared from their talks at scientific conferences or psychological conferences. So that even though it's on YouTube, that's still a viable source because it's just a clip from something, their own research that is being presented to their peers and to their particular audience, which is oftentimes parents, because people thought we grew out of it. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So I really want you to utilize your resources. Don't just rely on your own brain, utilize your resources. Tip number 3 under this one is to utilize your brain. I want you to self-reflect. I want you to look back over your life because a lot of people will say that trauma mimics ADHD. So most people just have trauma. Now, I will tell you, I am a person who has trauma, but my trauma occurred later in my childhood as opposed to earlier. And when I looked at my earlier childhood, the signs were always there. People thought I was just bored because of being gifted, but there's no such thing as boredom when your brain is a bar or is a lounge chair. It's like a lounge singer and some chattering conversation. It's happy hour in my head all the time. So there's always a song, there's always something going on. So that said, look at your life. What are those things that were always present with or without trauma? So my mom used to tell me that she was going to leave me, when we prepared for school because I was always late. She called me. I forgot what she called me. I really forgot. She's she's like, you need your own planet. I was always trying to fit in with people, even though I didn't necessarily like them. When I think about my childhood, it's like hilarious. The only way that I was able to listen to my teachers were to doodle on my paper. Or it started with me doodling on my clothes. So I would draw on my jeans and draw on my shoes, but because that was the only way I could listen to my teachers. And that has not changed. That's still what I have to do. Even when I'm coaching my business clients, I am sitting there taking notes, not because I want to keep track of what they're saying, but because I want to actually hear what they're saying and see it. I'm a person who has to watch movies with subtitles. Okay. So I need you to self assess, self reflect, think about your journey through childhood. And it may seem like they were not ADHD symptoms because, again, we thought it was focused. But if you were a chatty Cathy, if you were a space cadet, those could be different types of ADHD. It could be the hyperactivity because your brain's going, so your mouth's going, or it could be the inactivity because your brain's going and you're in la la land following wherever your brain goes. So go ahead and self-reflect. Think about the things that you used to do. I remember in kindergarten getting in trouble because there was a mosquito, and mosquitoes are just, I live in Florida, y'all. And so I remember taking my book bag and putting it over my head to protect myself from the mosquito and being sent to the corner. Yeah. Anyway, so self-reflect. What I'm saying is, while trauma may mimic, because trauma does alter the brain, many of us got trauma because of our neurological differences. If we were autistic or ADHD or a combination, then chances are we were easier to pick on because, we're more empathetic, or, we're just quieter, or, we go unnoticed, or we get in trouble enough that if something happened, nobody's paying attention to it because, this is the boy cry wolf kind of thing. So go ahead and do some self reflection. Now, I don't want you just looking into your childhood. Also look at your adulthood. Are you always late, right? Or are you always super early? ADHD works in the extremes. You're either so anxious of being late that you're like an hour or a day early, because that actually happened one time. I'm not that often early, y'all. Or you're chronically late. And as I said, I've been late since childhood. The only thing I was on time for, I think, was my birthday. I think that's the only one. So think about your life now, especially you being a creator or a business person, an entrepreneur, or even a mother, y'all. Think about yourself right now. Like, think about your computer activity or even your phone activity. How many tabs do you have open? If you are somebody who has over 5 tabs open on any given day, put that check mark. Think about your household management. Again, are you OCD about it? So super, super like military clean? Or are you like, I'll get to it later and got a dozen doom piles all over the house? Think about it. What does your life look like now? What did your life look like then? What did your life look like in between? Because I can tell you this, if you have ADHD and a whole lot of accomplishments, a lot of degrees, a lot of things that are some external validations, then chances are you're wearing some super masks. Super masks. And so in this series of your life, I'm asking you to take off the cape, because that means you've been living in fight or flight for way too long. And we will talk about that in another video. Now, again, I want you to stick to the end because I do have this tip that nobody's talking about, because I don't think they actually associated it with ADHD or its impact on ADHD. But again, we're going to get to that in step 4. So stick around. Let's talk about step 2 now. Step 2, advocate for yourself and find the right doctor. Now, I alluded to this a little bit earlier when I told you about my long journey towards getting my diagnosis and not having it until I was 41 years old. Ooh, we'll talk about the grief of that much, much later. So you need to advocate for yourself, okay? Because this is where it gets real. Not every doctor will believe you. Not every doctor will believe that there is a possibility that you have ADHD. Again, the medical community is quite misogynistic. They only think and really truly outdated. Y'all know the word hysterical comes from the fact that we have a uterus, and so they thought women were hysterical because of the hormones and all that jazz. That hasn't changed that much, okay? Because anytime you talk about sadness or worry or what have you, they say that you have anxiety or depression. And here's a Xanax, here's some Prozac, see you next month. Why is it like this? Because the research is old. Again, it is based on white school aged males, not grown women. We are so good at masking when we're younger for the most part because of societal expectations. Girls are to be sitting still, being quiet, paying attention, and pretty much with their heads down. Now, if you were raised a little bit different, good for you and kudos to your parents. But for most of us, or a lot of us, that's not the way it went. We were expected to do chores, household things, get good grades, and not cause problems. No waves, no surfing. And let me tell you this too. If you have ever been diagnosed with depression or anxiety, that's going to be a hard label for you to get off, because the minute a doctor hears that that is a diagnosis that some other doctor gave you, they're likely going to stick with it. So you're really going to have to self-advocate here, because it is going to be hard to be heard. As I mentioned earlier in the video, at the age of 16, I was diagnosed as major depressed. There's a reason for that. I'm not going to get into this, but just know that it was situational depression, not a chemical one. I never knew of that term until I met my ADHD doctor. So the first doctor I went to diagnosed me as major depressed. And every therapist or doctor I went to afterwards, because they always ask that question of, do you have depression or whatever, I would share the label that was given to me, even though I never felt it was true. And that's all they would stick to. And then when it increased to how my stomach was hurting, or I would start to develop like ulcers or irritable bowel or something by the time I was 25, then I was told I was anxious. So the second doctor was giving me anxiety pills on top of depression pills. And y'all, I already knew not to take those depression pills again because I've been there, done that at the age of 16. And it really, really affected my life. And so the third doctor, the fourth doctor, the fifth doctor, all of them kept giving me the anxiety and or depression diagnosis because I didn't look like what ADHD looks like. I was able to sit there and talk to them. And I don't know what it is about that the fact that I lean into a medical chair basically to go, listen, I better tell you everything that's going on with me because this is my one shot. And so that would then mean I didn't look like the person with ADHD because I came with a list of like, here's what's going on, blah, 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 blah. Again, before I knew the actual details of ADHD, it was always, nah, that's just depression. That's just anxiety. Here's a pill, which I didn't take. So again, thanks to Danny Donovan. I'll link her TikTok below so that you can go check it out while it's still available. But thanks to her and several other creators, I started to be able to see myself. I started to be able to feel heard. And I started to wonder, do I really have ADHD? And so I tried again. But this time I completely advocated for myself. So here's what you're going to do to make sure that you can advocate for yourself too. Here's your actionable tip. 1, be direct. When you go to your appointment, you need to be clear. You need to let them know, this is what I'm coming for. I already know what you're going to think it is, and I'm telling you it's not that. So you tell them you want the assessment for ADHD, and you tell them what symptoms you go through, and that's that. If they say no, move on to the next doctor. Because actionable step number 2, don't allow yourself to be dismissed. You do the dismissing. Okay. Because if a doctor wants to slap on you again the label of anxiety or depression, you stand your ground. First of all, you're paying them, even through your insurance. So what you can do is ask them to tell you why they think it can't be ADHD. And the other actionable tip is, don't just go to any old doctor. Now, if you need a referral, that's different. Go to your PCP or GP or wherever you're watching from. But you need to go to someone who is a specialist. And there are a couple of ways to find one. One, you can look in Facebook groups or on other social media and ask people if they go to a doctor or what have you inside of this state or that state, this city or that city, because it's very important that you meet an in-state doctor, even though there are some who are now online. But again, it's about that insurance thing and I don't know. So you kind of want to look for a doctor who is in state, especially if you are going to be open to medication, right? And unfortunately, our medication is classified as like a hard drug. We'll talk about medication in a later video, not this one. If you're going to be open, go for a specialist and try to look for one that's in your state. But again, there are some online ones. Now, what is helpful is also to Google, right? One of the piece of software that I love that helps me find doctors quickly, but also look up reviews is ZocDoc. ZocDoc is this awesome app that I've been using for at least 8, 9, 10 years. Oh yeah, it's been that long. I just realized that because you get to enter your insurance and have them show you only doctors around there. And then again, there are reviews, so then you can look up the reviews and read through them. And it's really important to see, do they have bedside manner? Do people feel like they're listened to? Is their staff friendly? Those things matter, especially in an experience like this where you may have been gaslit so much or just dismissed so much. So you need to feel comfortable and safe in approaching a doctor with your vulnerability. And again, if you go into like Facebook groups where there are ADHD support groups, you can ask them what doctors they've used or what online program doctors they've used and get referrals that way, because it's always great to hear from a source of a real patient, you know? Now, the other thing that you need to do in this particular step is remember, you don't have to settle for the first person. As I told you before, call around. That's exactly what I did. I picked up the phone. I said, hey, and I know we don't like the phone, y'all. But anyway, this was urgent. So I had to be the phone. I looked on ZocDoc or whatever. And then I went, hey, would you give me an ADHD assessment? If they said no, I was like, thank you. Hey, would you give me an ADHD assessment? If they said no, I said, thank you. I think I had to reach out to 3 or 4 doctors before the fourth one said, yes, but the assessment is $150 and insurance doesn't cover it. I was like, bet. I got $150 on my credit card. I'm coming. Now, I will tell you, this is pre-trend. So now some of these doctors are being astronomically assholes. So if you're finding this video helpful, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you don't miss all the juicy videos I have in store for you on this subject as well as others. And if you know someone else who could use this information, don't be greedy. Don't be a gatekeeper. Go ahead, hit share, and spread the love because everyone deserves to feel validated in their journey. Let's move on to step 3, the assessment process. What to expect and how to prepare. All right, once you found the right doctor, you're going to have to go through a formal assessment. Don't be scared. Even though you've never been through this process before, it may feel like a lot, but I'm here to help you understand what's coming so that you're ready. When I got to a psychologist who knew her stuff, I was relieved. I was just relieved. In fact, as I said, she was the one who taught me about the term situational depression, meaning your situation is causing you to be depressed. That's not something that needs to be medicated away. Your situation needs to find a way towards a solution. That's what needs to actually happen. And that's where therapy and other type of resources come into play. But that test, y'all, that test was something I wasn't prepared for. Now, the test that I did was really simple. I simply had to click the spacebar whenever I saw a certain letter in the midst of all the other letters and numbers. Now, y'all, I'm a gamer, a phone gamer. I love games. It's a dopamine hit like a serious addiction. So I was able to fairly well pay attention to the computer assessment. Quick caveat, doctors, if you are giving somebody an assessment, it should not be something that moves or blinks because I got motion sick and my vertigo was starting to be triggered with that computer test. So I had to keep my eyes rigid and I had to pay attention. Otherwise, I was not going to be able to drive the hour home. Okay, so that's just a side note. So that's actually what made my test hard, was the fact that I was struggling with the things that it was triggering inside of me. But something else happened that I didn't even realize I was doing. And now I know it's something that I do quite often. My mind was wandering and I was focusing on a lot of other different things. You might have said,
Oh my gosh, Shaniqua, isn't that what ADHD is? The inability to focus?
that's not true for me. I was focused on one half of my brain. The other half of my brain was paying attention to everything else. The van that was driving, wondering where they were going. What am I going to make for dinner tonight? Why did my partner say what he said 3 months ago? I had everything else going here while my finger was doing this. What ended up happening is I scored on the low end of the ADHD test, meaning I almost did not get qualified as ADHD because I had the ability to dissociate. My dissociation is directly tied to trauma that I went through. I had to dissociate. In fact, I remember exactly when I first did that. I didn't realize that was what I was doing. And so that almost made me tank the ADHD assessment. So be aware of that. If you are someone with trauma, you have to be aware of your ability to dissociate, your ability to separate from what is actually in front of you. That part's not ADHD. So here's your actionable tip for this step. One, understand that there are different assessments. I just got this archaic looking one. I hated that assessment, but I was determined not to fail it and almost did. So there are a few different ways that doctors do look for ADHD when they do their evaluations. One can be the digital online computerized test, but another could be a questionnaire that they take you through. Honestly, it should be both. It should not be one or the other because our skill sets are not one or the other. Or our skill sets may be one or the other. So this questionnaire might ask you about your habits, ask you about your life, ask you about your struggles, ask you about those different things. And so when my doctor mentioned, hey, you scored low on the assessment, I started bawling, y'all, because I was like, but look at my life. And I showed her my pictures of my car, of my house. Like, I was just like open, honest, and vulnerable. I was bawling. I was like, but I can't. My life is falling apart. So you have to also be prepared for questions. Be ready to talk about those symptoms. Be ready to talk about your daily life. Be ready to talk about how ADHD has impacted your work. This is why you have to do your research. How it's impacted your work, your relationships, your friendships, yourself. Oh, yes, y'all. ADHD also impacts our self esteem and our self confidence because of the littered things that we did not complete and also the things that people have said to us that we have internalized. Maybe you're lazy, you're not living up to your potential. Why are you always so different? Why don't you smile? You're always in your head. You're such a space cadet. They have littered it in your face, and what we end up doing sometimes is internalizing it and becoming the voice of their criticism. And also know this, the ADHD assessment is not foolproof. Again, let me reiterate that the research has not been traditionally on women or people of color, women of color, any intersectionalities. They usually have not happened with us. They were usually on school age white boys. And the belief was that you outgrow it. And let me tell you why they outgrow it. Because they get married and put the burden of life, of adulthood, and mothering on their wives. That's why. Because those who are single are still struggling. But listen, don't let any of that discourage you. If you really feel like knowing your gut intuitively that yes, this fits me, this helps me be seen, fight for yourself, advocate for yourself, keep pushing forward and finding someone who will listen to you, especially if it feels off, especially if the assessment did not come out the way that you went. Because, like I said, when she said I scored low, I said, but I scored on it, correct? So that was how I was able to put it together, the test. And while she didn't ask questions, I gave her the answers. And together, that's how I got to the place where I got to take medication. I'm not up on medication right now, which is why I'm all tangency. That's what happened for me. So that was step 3. Now let's talk about that one thing that nobody talks about. Now, I did allude to it earlier, and that is the impact of trauma on your ADHD assessment. So step 4 is to be mindful of trauma and disassociation. So like I said, here's something they don't tell you. is that your trauma and your ability to disassociate is going to impact how you do on your ADHD assessment. In fact, it will even impact how you do during your questioning or your questionnaire with your doctor, because we've allowed ourselves to mask for so long, we don't know how to drop it. So while you're trying to be brave and trying to hold in and trying not to cry or trying not to do this, while you're disassociating so that you don't, what could end up happening is they just go,
Oh, that's just depression. Oh, that's just anxiety.
but when you take the mask off, and it's hard work, but you can do that. When you take the mask off, you be open. You allow yourself to crumble in front of them because they cannot judge you as lazy or not living up to your potential or slothful or whatever. When you be open and vulnerable, that is going to allow you to get a more accurate assessment or evaluation from your doctor. So your actionable tips for this step is to be aware of your dissociation. Be aware of your coping mechanisms and the masks that you put on, especially if you've been through trauma. You've got to be mindful of your likelihood or the presence of your disassociation. This can impact your diagnosis and actually lead to another misdiagnosis, such as a personality disorder, anxiety, or depression. So you want to stay present. You want to do your best to stay as present as possible in the moment. It is so tempting to lean into your coping mechanism, into your masks, because being open, being honest, and being vulnerable can feel painful. But this is your opportunity. And who knows when your next one will come. This is your opportunity to finally be seen and be heard and be validated for what you've always felt was there. It doesn't mean you're broken, it means you're different. So, again, advocate if necessary. If you feel like your coping mechanisms, your mask, your ability to dissociate has affected your assessment score, speak up. Just like I did, bring out the phone, bring out your receipts, bring out whatever proof you have that ADHD has impacted negatively your life. We all know there are superpowers attached. I'll do a video later on, but those negative effects of ADHD can be crippling or debilitating or just confidence breaking. So make sure that you do not leave that doctor's office until you have stood up for yourself. Again, showing the receipts, especially if dissociation is the thing that you lean into, your coping mechanisms, your masks are the things you lean into. You want to make sure that you just be open, be vulnerable, be present, and be your own advocate. So let's recap what your 4 steps are to getting an ADHD diagnosis. 1, do your research. Know what ADHD looks like in adults, especially women. 2, advocate for yourself and don't let a doctor dismiss your concern. 3, prepare for the assessment process and know what to expect. And 4, be mindful of trauma and dissociation during your assessment so you can make sure your results are an accurate reflection of your true experience. Listen, getting diagnosed was a game changer for me, and it can be for you too. You deserve to be heard, understood, and supported. So don't give up. Again, if this video helped you out, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, turn on your notification bell, because you're not going to want to miss what's coming next. And if you are ready to take the next step in aligning your business with your passion, your purpose, and your profits, drop down into the description below and grab my free guide, 5 steps to align your business with your purpose and get paid. Again, it's linked in the description below. So by the way, if you love this video, you're going to love the next one. Click here to check out my video on why most marketing advice does not work for ADHD entrepreneurs. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. And remember, girl, use your voice. The world needs it. Bye-bye now. And I know firsthand how confusing, overwhelming, and frustrating the cinematic. And so what ended up happening is, this is weird. Imagination.